How this old man became a millionaire, everyone was stunned. Sometimes, the most revolutionary change comes from the quietest soul. This story begins in a humble corner of a small American town, a place where life moved slow, neighbors knew each other's names, and the morning air carried the scent of coffee brewing in every kitchen. For decades, Grandpa Mashek Ali had been selling roasted chickpeas from an old wooden pushcart. Most folks thought of him as just another aging street vendor, someone barely scraping by. But what no one knew was that the chickpeas he sold carried more than flavor. They carried a secret passed down for generations, a secret powerful enough to rattle the largest corporations and challenge the greed of powerful men. On quiet mornings, when the air was still and the soft coo of pigeons blended with the distant church bells, Mashek would push his cart to a busy corner where the road to the school, the local farms, and the small farmers' market crossed. His routine never changed: white shirt, worn blue sandals stained with dust, a faded cap on his head. His chickpeas weren't just a snack, they had a reputation. Stories spread over the years: a student who ate them before an exam and passed with flying colors, a job seeker who landed his dream job after sharing a handful, sick children who seemed to recover after tasting them. People began to believe his chickpeas carried blessings. At the edge of his cart hung a small wooden sign, hand-painted in both English and Arabic. "These chickpeas can change more than your body. They can change your destiny." Served with prayers. Often by his side was his grandson, Faison, a lean young man with city experience in his eyes but his heart still tied to his grandfather's simplicity. Faison had returned after years of higher education, having seen the glitter of urban life but finding true peace back home. Mashek Ali rarely spoke, but when he did, time seemed to pause. People came not only to buy but to receive his blessings. If a child couldn't pay, he would smile and hand them a bag for free, saying, "Money is worth less than a pure intention." What the whole town didn't know, what Faison himself didn't know, was that Grandpa Mashek had quietly saved millions of dollars over the years from his small cart. He had no desire for fame or luxury. Beneath his cart was a hidden compartment where, day after day, he stored away a portion of his earnings. To him, this wasn't wealth, it was a trust, a sacred fund meant for something greater. His dream was not to spend it on himself, but to build something for the generations to come: schools, medical clinics, places of worship and peace. He believed that wealth locked in your pocket becomes a burden, but wealth released from the heart becomes light. The day Faison learned about this secret, he was stunned. "Grandpa, you have all this money, and never told anyone." Mashek Ali simply smiled. "Son, when your intentions are pure, silence becomes the loudest voice." But the time for silence was over. He told Faison that the money would soon serve its true purpose. The cart, once a simple source of livelihood, was about to become the foundation of a mission, a promise, and a revolution. That afternoon, under the bright sun, the townspeople noticed something unusual. Mashek Ali was pushing his cart toward the community square, but there were no chickpeas cooking. Instead, the cart was covered with a clean white cloth, and on top were thick envelopes and documents. As he stood in the center of the square, the chatter died down. This was a man who had never once addressed the town publicly. Children stopped playing. Women put down their water buckets. Men straightened up from their chairs. Every eye turned to him. With a steady voice, he said, "My dear friends, I have something to share that I have carried in my heart for many years." Faison stepped forward and read aloud from the papers. Grandpa Mashek Ali was donating his entire life's savings, nearly $25 million, to the town. The money would fund the construction of a modern school, a small but complete hospital, and a beautiful community mosque. The square fell silent. Then a woman began to cry softly. An old farmer wiped his eyes. Children stared in awe. A shopkeeper stepped forward and asked quietly, "Grandpa, you did this for us?" Mashek Ali smiled gently. "Yes. Because you are all mine." But not every face in the crowd reflected gratitude. Standing at a distance was Rugupti, the wealthiest shop owner in town, a man who often trapped young workers in debt and held an informal grip over the local economy. His eyes held no surprise, only unease, jealousy, and fear. He thought to himself, a street vendor with this kind of money? This can't be real. If it is, I'll find a way to stop it. And if it's not, I'll expose it. As the crowd blessed and embraced Mashek Ali, Ragupti's mind was already turning. Mashek noticed him in the crowd. He could read the poison in those eyes. He knew some would try to stop him. But his face stayed calm, because he understood that the road of truth was never easy, but it always ended high. That night, in the quiet of his small home, Mashek Ali unlocked a wooden chest from a dusty corner. Inside lay an ancient, weathered book, its pages written in a mix of Arabic, Persian, and symbols no one could easily read. It was the true source of his knowledge, centuries-old wisdom on herbs, spiritual healing, and the balance of nature. But outside, in the shadows, someone was listening. And the secret was no longer safe. The night was still, the moonlight half hidden behind drifting clouds, casting silver shadows on the dusty streets of the small town. Inside the dimly lit room of his modest home, Grandpa Mashek Ali sat beside the ancient wooden chest, the old book resting in his lap. Faison leaned forward, his eyes drawn to the worn cover, where a faded emblem of a radiant sun with swirling lines shimmered faintly in the lamplight. This, Mashek said softly, is not just a book. It is the inheritance of our ancestors, wisdom not written for greed, but for protection. When Faison carefully opened the first page, a delicate fragrance seemed to rise from the parchment, the scent of earth after rain, mixed with something timeless, almost sacred. The text was unlike anything he had seen before, lines in Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, and strange symbols that looked like they belonged to no known alphabet. Some pages carried hand-drawn sketches of plants, others had maps, and many bore prayers written in elegant calligraphy. "This is priceless, Grandpa," Faison whispered, awe in his voice. Mashek nodded. "It's not meant to be sold. It's meant to be safeguarded. It has the knowledge to heal, to preserve, to bring balance to the world, but only if it stays in the right hands." Just then, a faint rustling came from outside the window. Faison turned sharply, catching a shadow shifting in the moonlight. He rushed to the door and scanned the street, but found nothing, only the rustle of tree leaves and a distant dog barking. When he returned, Mashek's expression was serious. "We've been overheard, my son. It has begun. There will be those who want this knowledge for themselves." The following morning, in a back room of his shop, Ragupti was already on the phone. His voice was low, almost trembling with excitement and greed. "There's an old man here who sells chickpeas," he told the deep voice on the other end. "But he's sitting on a fortune, and some kind of ancient book. A book with power." A chuckle came through the line. "Interesting. We'll send someone." By the next day, two strangers arrived in town. One was Vikrant, tall, sharply dressed, with a polished smile and an expensive watch gleaming on his wrist. The other was Satish, quieter, observant, with eyes that missed nothing. They wasted no time. Posing as philanthropists, they visited homes, donated medicines, even promised funding for a new school. All the while, they asked casually about Grandpa Mashek Ali. "Is it true his chickpeas are special? Has he always lived here? Does he keep anything unusual?" The townspeople, innocent and loyal, spoke warmly of Mashek but revealed little of value. Still, Vikrant and Satish could sense there was more to the story. It didn't take long for them to realize the real prize wasn't the man, it was the book. That night, in Ragupti's dimly lit back room, Vikrant spread a map of the town on the table, candlelight flickering over its edges. "We don't need to confront him directly," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "We find where he keeps the book, and take it." Satish spoke for the first time, his tone chilling. "People like him trust too easily. That will be our way in." Meanwhile, at the other side of town, Mashek had gathered Faison and two trusted friends, Rajesh and Imran. The four of them sat cross-legged in the silence of his small home. Mashek told them the story of the book, how it had survived wars, betrayals, and generations of guardians. His voice was steady, but the urgency was clear. "We can't keep it here anymore. he said. Too many eyes are searching. We must move it somewhere only the pure of heart can find. Under the dim light, he unrolled an ancient parchment from the bottom of the chest, a map drawn in faded ink. Symbols of a sun, a winding river, and a hidden cave marked its surface. This, Mashek explained, is where our ancestors once placed their most precious treasures, a place untouched for centuries. That same night, dressed in dark clothing to blend with the shadows, the four men slipped silently out of town. Mashek carried the book wrapped in cloth, holding it close to his chest as if it were a living being. They followed an old dirt path that wound into the forest, a path the elders had always said would only reveal itself to those whose hearts were free from arrogance. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to come alive. Branches arched overhead like cathedral ceilings, leaves whispered in the night air, and the ground beneath their feet felt almost like it was breathing. Hours later, they reached the entrance to a cave almost swallowed by wild bushes. Clearing the brush, they found carvings on the stone, the same swirling sun emblem from the book's cover. This is it, Mashek murmured. Inside, the cave smelled of damp stone and ancient earth. Moss clung to the walls, and the air was cool and heavy with history. In the far corner stood a massive rock, slightly shifted from its place. With effort, the men moved it aside, revealing a small hollow in the ground. Mashek pressed his lips to the edge of the book, whispered a prayer, and laid it inside. They covered it with earth, rolled the stone back, and stood in silence. The only sound was the echo of their breathing. As they made their way back toward town, the forest seemed to watch them, not threateningly, but with a kind of quiet approval. But in the shadows, other eyes were watching too. Vikrant's informant had already sent word. The old man was seen heading into the forest with something wrapped in cloth. By dawn, Vikrant's plan was already in motion. The first light of morning had barely brushed the rooftops when Grandpa Mashek Ali's eyes snapped open. Something, a deep, unshakable feeling, pulled him from his bed. The air felt different, heavier, as though a warning had slipped in through the night. Faison emerged from the other room, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Grandpa, you're up early. Couldn't sleep?" Mashek's gaze was steady but troubled. "No, my son. My heart says what we hid may not be safe anymore." Without stopping for breakfast, Mashek, Faison, Rajesh, and Imran set out for the forest again. The morning air was crisp, but the path felt less welcoming than the night before. The trees stood motionless, their leaves whispering in a tone that felt almost like disapproval. When they reached the cave, Rajesh was the first to notice it, faint footprints in the damp earth. Fresh. Someone had been here, perhaps only hours earlier. Faison's pulse quickened. He rushed to the stone, hands trembling as he pushed it aside and began digging. Within moments, his voice broke through the silence. "Grandpa, it's gone. The book, centuries of knowledge and blessings, had been stolen." Mashek knelt, pressing his hands into the disturbed earth. He bowed his head and whispered a quiet prayer. "O Lord, if this is our trial, give us the strength to stand firm." Far from the cave, in a secure, sterile laboratory miles outside of town, Vikrant and Satish sat at a wide glass table. In front of them lay the stolen book, bathed in the harsh glare of an overhead lamp. State-of-the-art scanners hummed as technicians in white coats hovered around it. Cameras clicked, capturing every page. But something was wrong. As they turned each page, the writing began to shift, first fading, then twisting into shapes no one could understand, until finally some pages turned completely blank. "What the hell is this?" Vikrant snapped. Satish adjusted a scanner, frustration creeping into his voice. "It's resisting us. The words, they're disappearing." Experts were called in, linguists, religious scholars, even an occult specialist. All failed. The knowledge refused to reveal itself. It was as if the book could sense the greed of the hands that held it, locking itself away from their eyes. When the news reached Mashek, he gathered Faison, Rajesh, and Imran in his small home. His expression was calm, almost satisfied. "They have it," he said. "But they cannot read it. The book was never meant to yield its secrets to the corrupt. Nature itself guards it." Faison's voice was urgent. But, Grandpa, we can't just leave it with them. We have to get it back. Mashek nodded slowly. Yes, but not with force. If we fight greed with greed, we lose. We'll use their own weakness, their hunger, against them. From the bottom of the chest, Mashek pulled out something the others had never seen, an old, tightly wrapped scroll. As he unrolled it, they saw a map inked in gold and deep brown, marked with strange symbols and the same sun emblem. This, Mashek said, is the second key. It leads to something even more important than the book. Something the book itself only hinted at. The map pointed toward a different part of the forest, deeper and more treacherous, a place whispered about in town folklore, an ancient well that had never run dry, whose waters were said to bless only those whose intentions were pure. The four men knew what they had to do. Without telling a soul, they packed quietly and waited until the last light of evening to set out. The path was dangerous, thick roots clawed at the earth, and the ground was slick with fallen leaves. Yet Mashek walked with steady steps, his face calm, his grip on the scroll firm. When they reached the well, the air around it seemed to shimmer. The water glowed faintly green, as though lit from within. On the stone rim of the well was carved the same swirling sun emblem. This is it, Mashek whispered. As they stood there, the forest went utterly still. Then, without warning, a soft light rose from the center of the well. The mist coiled and twisted, forming into the figure of an elderly man, a spirit with a white beard, luminous skin, and a staff in hand. Faison's voice was barely a whisper. Who is that? Mashek's tone was solemn. One of our forefathers, a guardian of this knowledge. The figure's voice didn't speak aloud, yet it resonated inside their chests. You who have walked in honesty, listen. The book is taken, but the true treasure remains. Protect it. For if greed takes hold of this wisdom, the earth will rise against man. With his staff, the spirit drew a line on the stone. The ground split open, revealing another scroll, older, thicker, wrapped in layers of cloth. Mashek lifted it with reverence, unwrapping it to reveal vibrant, unchanging writing, as clear as if it had been penned that very morning. This, Mashek said, is the last warning and the final key. But they weren't alone. Hidden among the trees, Vikrant and Satish watched, their eyes locked on the scroll in Mashek's hands. Satish leaned close to Vikrant. That's it. That's what we need. We take it when they leave. The spirit, as if sensing the danger, raised his staff again. A narrow path of light appeared on the forest floor, leading away from the well. Follow this. Time is short. Danger is near. Without a second thought, the four men followed the glowing trail into the darkness, unaware that the hunters were already moving in behind them. The glowing path wound like a silver ribbon through the dense forest, guiding Grandpa Mashek Ali, Faison, Rajesh, and Imran deeper into the wilderness. The air felt charged, as if every leaf and stone was aware of their journey. Behind them, hidden in the shadows, Vikrant, Satish, and two armed men moved in silence, keeping just enough distance to avoid detection. The trail ended at the mouth of a narrow, jagged cave. Its entrance was half hidden by moss-covered boulders, and a cool breeze drifted out from within, carrying the scent of damp earth and something faintly sweet, like blooming flowers in the dark. The glowing line on the ground stopped at the cave's threshold, fading into the stone floor inside. This is the place, Mashek said quietly. His voice carried both reverence and urgency. Inside, the cave opened into a wide chamber. The walls shimmered faintly, as if laced with veins of gold, and small rivulets of water trickled down into shallow pools. In the center stood a flat stone pedestal, its surface etched with the swirling sun emblem. Mashek carefully placed the newly found scroll on top, and as it touched the stone, the carvings lit up with a soft, golden light. The glow spread outward, and strange, ancient symbols appeared on the walls, not carved, but shimmering like living light. Faison stared at them in awe. Grandpa, what is this? Mashek ran his fingers along the glowing lines. These are instructions, warnings, from those who came before us. They say that if the guardians falter, the knowledge will move on. It cannot be destroyed, but it will vanish from those unworthy. Before they could study it further, the sound of footsteps echoed at the cave's mouth. Shadows flickered against the golden glow. Vikrant stepped in first, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel floor, followed by Satish and the two armed men. "Well," Vikrant said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "you've saved us a lot of trouble. Just hand it over, and no one gets hurt." Faizan instinctively stepped in front of his grandfather, fists clenched. Rajesh and Imran shifted to block the intruder's path. Mashek's voice was calm but firm. "You can take it, if you can read it." Vikrant motioned for Satish to grab the scroll. As soon as Satish's hands touched it, the golden light in the room dimmed. The scroll's writing began to fade, not entirely, but enough to make the symbols blur. Satish frowned. "It's happening again. The same as the book." Vikrant snatched it from him, frustration twisting his features. "Then we'll take all of it. The scroll, the stone, whatever makes it work." But before he could give the order, the air inside the cave shifted. A deep hum resonated from the pedestal, vibrating through the ground. From the glowing walls, ghostly figures began to emerge. Tall, robed elders with eyes like molten gold, the same guardians who had appeared at the well. Their presence filled the chamber with a force that pressed against the skin like a rising storm. One of them spoke, his voice echoing in their minds. "This place is not for the greedy. Leave now, or be swallowed by the earth you disrespect." The armed men raised their weapons instinctively, but the cave floor shuddered violently. Cracks split the ground, and from them poured a cold, luminous mist that coiled around Vikrant's legs, holding him in place. Faizan turned to Mashek. "Grandpa, what do we do?" Mashek met the guardian's gaze. "We follow the light." The pedestal's carvings flared brighter, and a new path of golden symbols appeared along the cave wall, leading to a narrow side passage. Without hesitation, Mashek signaled for Faizan, Rajesh, and Imran to move. They slipped into the passage, the guardian's mist swirling behind them like a protective barrier. Vikrant's voice shouted after them, angry and desperate. "You can't hide forever! That scroll will be mine!" But his voice was cut off by a low, rumbling roar from deep within the earth. The narrow passage wound upward, eventually opening to the cool night air. They emerged on a rocky hillside overlooking the forest, the stars sharp and clear above them. For the first time since the book had been stolen, Mashek allowed himself to exhale. Yet he knew the danger wasn't over. The scroll was still in his hands, and as long as it existed, those like Vikrant would hunt it. Mashek looked at the night sky, then at Faizan. "This is no longer about hiding. It's about preparing. The real test is still ahead." The rocky hillside sloped gently into the valley below, where the faint lights of their small town shimmered in the distance. The night air was cool, but it carried a quiet urgency, as if the forest itself knew the scroll's fate was hanging in the balance. Grandpa Mashek Ali stood with the scroll pressed against his chest, his weathered hands steady despite the danger that still shadowed them. Faizan, Rajesh, and Imran formed a protective circle around him, their eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of pursuit. From somewhere deep in the forest came the faint, echoing crack of a branch, a reminder that Vikrant and his men were still out there. "We can't go back to town," Mashek said quietly. "If we do, they'll follow us and bring their greed to our homes." Faizan's jaw tightened. "Then where do we go?" Mashek turned toward the ridgeline. "There's one last place. A sanctuary older than this town itself, a place even the maps have forgotten." They moved quickly, guided by the pale light of the moon. The path was treacherous, winding between steep drops and dense thickets. More than once, Faizan caught sight of shadows moving in the distance, but each time they vanished into the darkness before he could be certain. After nearly an hour, the trees opened into a clearing. At its center stood an ancient stone archway, half collapsed and covered in ivy. Beneath it was a slab of marble etched with the same swirling sun emblem. The air inside the archway felt warmer, alive with a subtle energy that made the skin tingle. "This," Mashek said, "is where the first guardians swore their oath. If the scroll rests here, it will vanish from this world, not destroyed, but hidden beyond the reach of greed." Phaeton's voice was soft. And if we hide it here, will we ever see it again? Mashek met his grandson's eyes. If the world truly needs it, it will return. That is the promise of the Guardians. He stepped forward, unwrapping the scroll one last time. The gold-inked letters glowed brighter than ever, as if recognizing its final resting place. With a steady breath, Mashek placed it on the marble slab. Immediately, tendrils of light rose from the stone, curling around the scroll like vines before pulling it gently down into the surface. In seconds it was gone. The emblem on the marble flared once, then faded into stillness. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The forest was utterly quiet, even the night insects had paused. Then, from beyond the trees came the sound of angry shouts. Vikrant and his men had reached the clearing. They burst into the open, weapons in hand, only to find the slab empty. "Where is it?" Vikrant roared. Mashek stepped forward calmly. "It's gone to where you will never touch it. Even if you spent 100 lifetimes searching, it would not show itself to you." Sadish's eyes narrowed. "Then you've condemned it to be useless." Mashek shook his head. "No. I've freed it from harm." The ground beneath the arch trembled, and a deep rumble rose from below. The Guardians' golden figures appeared once more, forming a wall between the two groups. Their eyes glowed fiercely as a voice echoed in every mind present. "Leave. The choice has been made. The knowledge is safe. Greed has no home here." Vikrant's men stumbled back under the force of the unseen power, their weapons falling uselessly to the ground. Even Vikrant's defiance faltered in the presence of the Guardian's gaze. Without another word, they retreated into the forest's shadows. The golden figures turned to Mashek. "Your duty is done, Guardian. Pass on the lesson, for the next generation will face their own trial." And just as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone, leaving only the night and the sound of wind through the trees. Back in town, word spread quickly that Grandpa Mashek Ali had returned. People gathered, expecting celebration, but he called them instead to the town square. There, under the glow of the old street lamps, he told the story, not of money or of power, but of responsibility. "This knowledge," he said, "was never mine alone. It belongs to the pure of heart, to those who protect rather than exploit. Remember that what you guard in secret is sometimes more powerful than what you share with the world." In the weeks that followed, the new school began construction. The small clinic opened its doors. And though the scroll was gone, its spirit seemed to linger in the town, in the kindness of neighbors, the fairness of trades, and the way strangers were welcomed without suspicion. On his final morning, Mashek sat in his chair by the window, wearing his familiar white shirt. The sun rose over the rooftops, bathing his face in gold. He smiled faintly, whispered a prayer, and closed his eyes for the last time. Phaeton, now the new guardian in spirit, looked to the horizon and understood, the real treasure had never been the book or the scroll. It was the wisdom to use power only for good, and the courage to protect it, no matter the cost.